The nature of monkey was irrepressible.
I say chura nachu, which is me mangling Okinawan for something approximating hello lovelies. Oh dear, it's a Zak Smith book. And it's a Lamentations book. And so some disclaimers are necessary, unfortunately. Got it for free from Jim Raji, who is a friend. It's by Zak Smith. Zak Smith is a stubborn, vexatious arsehole, quick to anger, tenacious in his arsehattery, ungrateful, mean as a particularly sociopathic snake, so much so that other snakes are like, whoa, that guy's a cunt. And he has no more right to live on God's green earth than a weasel. But he hasn't been convicted of anything that he's been accused of, and merely being a wanker of the first water, or pre-cum, I guess, is not a crime in and of itself. He's also aggravatingly talented, and it's a shame he's such a tool, because that prevents a lot of people from enjoying his shit. However, many people would say similar of me, so swings and roundabouts, I guess. I am disinclined to continue to defend the chap, because he's been a bit of a fuckstick to me. And I also hate that I have to mention all of this, but if I don't do the proper genuflections and rituals to Ward versus Gobshite, some absolute cum spanner will turn up in the comments to berate me, and to go on at length about how much of an awful person Zak is. So, there you go. Satisfied? Good. Let's press on with the interesting stuff. Nebulith is Zak Smith and Alex Hobson's new book via Lamentations of Lame Princess, and it is an old school / weird version of Oriental Adventures, in a way. This is a fantasy version of Okinawa, dominated by the titular Nebulith. What is the Nebulith? Well, imagine a volcanic eruption where the enormous plume of smoke and ash freezes in place and becomes a sort of inverted dungeon, in a way, full of lava tubes and caves, populated by weirdness, spirits, demons and horrors, as well as wonders and treasures for people to pilfer. It's a sort of made in Abyss, in reverse, minus the torture porn and the mass murder of little children, which, when you think about it, is a bit of an odd reversal for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which would normally crank all of those factors up to 11. So, hopefully that's given you some sort of idea of what it is. A massive inverted mountain of a dungeon over a fantasy Okinawa. Now, Okinawa is sufficiently different to Japan's mainland to be interesting and individual in its own right. And having done a lot of research and reading recently for my project, Ronin, over the last year and a bit, that certainly comes through here, the differences. Besides the weird setting of the Nebulith, the book also gives you usable and transferable rules for Asiatic and Japanese classes, martial arts, which is what people are here for, I would imagine, martial arts weapons and other localized weapons, spells, items, magic, monsters, which is something that Lamentations of the Flame Princess as a baseline is somewhat short of, thanks to Jim Raji's perfectly valid choice to not include monsters, particularly in the main book, outside of a handful of examples, because people encountering monsters shouldn't really know what they're getting into. Here, however, things are a little bit different on that score, and this is also a perfectly valid sort of approach to take. There are also many, many random tables of stuff to inspire you, things like mission generators and so on. Zak Smith's art is something you're either going to love or you're going to hate, I think, though his personal style is here somewhat I do like Shibari. Is somewhat moderated by the fact that he's doing imitations of more traditional Japanese styles here and there, right? And that there are other people involved in the design and particularly the calligraphy. So it is still recognisably Zak Smith art with all his particular obsessions and quirks as an artist, and it does tend to prioritise that artistic expression over other concerns in book design, but it is also somewhat moderated, as I say, by the fact that there is a very strong element of traditional Japanese art, which he is attempting, mostly succeeding, to imitate in his own way. But you either love or you hate Zak Smith's art. So if the whole thing is Zak Smith art, then you're gonna have a strong reaction one way or the other. Personally, I like his art. I do, however, find his handwritten fonts hard to read sometimes. Given his visual arts background and the skills of Molly Scanlon, who did the design, and KK, who did the calligraphy, this is a beautiful book. You know, it has ribbons, 2 of them in fact. It's hardback, all the usual sort of print quality stuff you can point to Lamentations for and say, yeah, this is a good thing. So it's beautiful, as all of Zak's books have been in their own way, again, if you like the style. And there is what I consider to be excellent use of Japanese patterns and watercolour effects alongside Zak's distinct style. This is, of course, to me, somewhat fucking annoying because I've been working on Ronin for a very long time, and this replicates some of the approach that I was going to take with the art. So between this and the Morkborg Ronin, I am very annoyed. But I guess on the bright side, it's part of the zeitgeist at the moment for whatever reason. There is an undercurrent of weeaboo interest that has risen up again. This is more readable and referenceable than Morkborgian material, but it is also not as readable as a regular RPG book, and the Bestiary is a particular example of that. However, this is also a much bigger, thicker book than a typical Borg-like, and so the cumulative difficulty in referability may still end up vexing you in the same way. Any individual part is easier to read and understand and absorb than a Morkborgian book, but the cumulative overall effect and the referenceability may suffer somewhat from the artistic approach. Martial arts are introduced in the book, and they can be a little bit complicated, but one of my chief concerns and annoyances with a lot of OSR games is that they don't have a lot of combat options for fighters or indeed anyone else. You know, it's just, I hit it with my axe. Okay. You get past his armor, you do 3 hit points. He hits you with his axe. Oh, it missed. Your turn. Boring. Right? Not like cinematic or even real fights. Martial arts options give you a few more ways to do things, which is better, and it particularly allows the fighter substitutes in this game to pull some more things out the bag when they're fighting in combat here. And other people can learn martial arts moves as well, provided you have the treasure and the time to pay a martial arts master to teach you, or you may have to jump through some quest-like hoops in order to get them to teach you as well, which, it's good motivation for a game. However, the relative lack of fidelity in OSR systems as a whole, and of course Lamentations as well, does mean that most techniques have very minor effects, and the juice may not particularly be worth the squeeze when it comes to adding martial arts into your game. It may be too much complication for what amounts to +1 damage or forcing a save versus a relatively minor effect for the most part. But this can also mean that the martial arts and the introduction of the martial arts doesn't screw up your regular game if you cross this over with regular Lamentations or the other way around. You might also be concerned that this represents a sort of power creep issue for Lamentations or any other OSR game that you bring it into, but there are some attempts to balance this by weakening other aspects of characters outside of combat, like saving throws, for example, which can lead to a bit of a weird situation where a martial artist might have worse saves than a regular fighter, but martial artists are also constantly forcing each other to make saves by using their special moves, which feels a bit peculiar. There's a bit of a 5e invasion with advantage-disadvantage rules, particularly with reference to combat, but lots of people incorporate those rules, so I don't see anything particularly wonky about it. If you're interested in the mathematics, it's basically the equivalent of adding or taking away a bonus of plus or minus 3, so if you want to stick to penalties and bonuses, that's, 3 to 4. Yeah, you can fiddle it that way. Alright, the new classes that we get include Karate Master, but the rules herein frankly feel a lot more like Kung Fu than Karate. Grappling rules are spelled out in a way that's more easily accessible and understandable, and revised a little from regular grappling rules, and that's always a point of contention, particularly in D&D type games. So yeah, you've got your Karate Master, you've got your Kijimuna Hunter. These are Eastern Elves, which is racist class again. Not my cup of tea, but your mileage may vary. Of course there are ninjas, even though ninjas either didn't exist or didn't want you to think that they existed. Pirates, which is also an opportunity to play Gaijin or people from other Eastern cultures if you want to play them within the game, so that's fun. And they have sort of random or quasi-random special abilities, so they're kind of like a gambler's version of an expert in a way, but with a bit more fighting skill. Samurai, which is basically an Eastern fighter. Yuta, who are female Eastern clerics, and to an extent, of course, you can play your regular classes, albeit with a bit of a different flavor to evoke the East that we're in with this game. Now, the Bestiary, in particular, is a welcome addition. Again, though I do agree with Raji's philosophy in LOTFP of making monsters unusual, weird, and unknown. Yeah, I agree with that approach. That is a good approach, so people aren't just going, it's a mimic, it's a goblin, or, oh, it's a XYZ, it's vulnerable to ABC, using player meta-knowledge to take on whatever it is that you introduce. But it is also nice to have some pre-made monsters, especially given the way in which the real-world Japanese culture exhaustively defined and wrote down what all their yokai, their spirits and monsters, were, which is a big part of the inspiration behind Pokemon, of course. So it's good to have an actual bestiary, and that kind of reflects the culture as well. And all of these monsters, well, not all of them, many of these monsters should be sufficiently unfamiliar to most Western gamers, despite rampant weebery everywhere. They should be different enough that people can be surprised. I'm not sure exactly why the Tengu look like Kia parrots from New Zealand, but I'm here for it. Presumably they're also completely fearless, flightless, and like eating rubber, just to fit properly. But moving on, we do get a hex-ish by hex-ish guide to the island, its people, its culture, its points of interest. though with each hex being 6 miles across, there is plenty of room to include additional things, should you wish to, in each and every hex. Like, within 6 miles of me in England, you know, there's multiple Iron Age hill forts, a castle, multiple towns and villages. You know, a 6 mile hex shouldn't contain just one thing, so there is plenty of opportunity to put other stuff in or to avoid what is in each hex. The Collar, which is the city around the Nebulith in particular, gets some detailing. It's far from exhaustive, and I'm not entirely sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in this instance. On the one hand, it can be frustrating. If you enjoy the detail and learning about a new setting and so on, then the relative lack of detail may annoy you. But it can also be a relief, particularly if you're someone who plays a lot of different games in a lot of different settings, not to have to memorize a whole bunch of stuff and for space to be left for you to make your own shit up. And both approaches are equally valid. I'm not sure how I feel about this one, which probably means it's somewhere in the middle. But it does definitely leave room for you to make the Collar your own version of it. We also get a few dungeons, magical items, and tips on resolving the delayed magical apocalypse that the Nebulith represents. New magic spells, which include summoning spirits, which is almost as bad of an idea as the regular summoning spell, but perhaps not quite. So if you're a coward, you might want to take summon spirit instead. There's lists of recommended media, which I always find interesting in anyone's books, which you can look to for inspiration, and a whole bunch of tables for generating adventures and adding random chaos, panic and disorder to adventures that might otherwise be lacking in it, though that's not generally my experience with adventures, particularly Lamentations adventures. Alright, so I'm supposed to give this a score, aren't I? Style-wise, there are drawbacks to Zak's approach in his books to presentation, but there is no denying that it goes all out on its style, and I in particular appreciated the inclusion of calligraphy and the inclusion of Eastern patterns and the references that I recognized from my recent research. So I appreciated all of that. It's a low 5, but only because usability suffers here and there, where I feel it is particularly important as well, such as the Bestiary. It's important to be able to quickly and easily read the stats and references for a creature, and the style gets in the way a bit there, but not enough to knock it down a whole point. Substance wise, I give it a 4. It is certainly sufficient, but could have done with a little bit more here and there, especially I feel on the Collar and the impact and meaning and the wider reaching effect of the Nebulith itself, its broader sort of societal effects. The Nebulith is this gigantic brute fact, but what was the wider effect of it on society and the world around it? I didn't feel that was gone into enough necessarily. Broader Japan and the East in general, and maybe even the world, would be impacted. Yeah, this thing's going to be visible beyond the horizon, and I didn't feel that was gone into enough. So substance 4. So that is 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5. If you're a Lamentations person, definitely. If you're a Zak Sabbath fan, definitely. If you want inspiration and ideas for Eastern adventures in your OSR type games, definitely. Plenty of inspiration here. The mechanics here, particularly around the martial arts and the schools and so on, could quite easily be adapted into a Western fencing or HEMA sort of set of rules, which would be interesting to see someone do. So from a kit bashing point of view, there's a bunch of stuff that's useful in here as well, but particularly the martial arts. It's not a huge amount of the book, but it's enough, and it's interesting. So, like all Zak Sabbath stuff, like all Zak Smith stuff, this all hinges on a central conceit, right? The one thing that the entire weird world is built around, and in this instance, it is the Nebulith. And if you like that idea, fantastic. If you don't like that idea, you're going to be left feeling kind of meh about the whole thing. But there is sufficient here also that you could run a historical campaign set in medieval Japan or whatever else. Unlike a lot of Lamentations stuff, where the weirdness is presumed to be hidden, rare, secret, just common for player characters, this is one where a gigantic stone cloud in the sky dominates everyone's sight for, much further than the sea level horizon due to its sheer size. And that's different. And as I say, like most Zak stuff, everything hinges around this central conceit. So if you like the idea, you're going to get more out of the book. If you don't like the idea, you're not. But there is plenty here regardless. So all things considered, yeah, it gets my recommendation. If you can get past the Zak thing, which I can. Chibario!
Sure, you could play one of those hoity-toity horror games where the most horrifying thing that happens is someone wearing a corset who really shouldn't. Or you could grind a zombie's face into a belt sander.